For many years, the Digest of Education Statistics has reported that about 11% of college students have disabilities. But since 2017, they've started reporting that about 20% of college students have disabilities. Additionally, if you look at IPEDS data, which is the database that all post-secondary institutions have to report to, most institutions are reporting that only about 3% of their students are registered with disability services offices. So what's going on here? Why are these estimates so different? What are the causes and consequences of such different estimates? And what might institutions learn about measuring disability when it comes to thinking about disability on their own campus? I'm Ryan Wells. I'm the director of the Center for Student Success Research at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. In this brief informational video, part of a research project funded by the Massachusetts Department of Higher Education, I introduce various ways that institutions attempt to gather data to better understand and to report about college students with disabilities. I will discuss various ways of collecting these data, as well as the strengths and limitations of various approaches. Ultimately, trying to come up with one definitive number of students with disabilities on a campus is impractical and not the recommended strategy. Instead, using multiple ways of understanding and representing disability is recommended to provide more nuance and ultimately better support all college students. When it comes to estimating the population of students with disabilities on a campus, there are many options. Many people first think, I'll just ask my local disability services office. And that's a reasonable place to start. But as an understanding of the population of students with disabilities on a campus, that choice has some pretty severe limitations. The IPEDS numbers I referred to earlier, where the majority of institutions report less than 3% of their students as having disabilities, are based on students registered with disability services offices. The main concern with using these numbers is that they will simply miss many students. According to a 2015 study of college students who had documented disabilities when they were in high school, only 35% disclosed that disability to their college campuses. This is compounded by many students who have disabilities who did not receive services in high school or did not understand themselves to have a disability prior to coming to college. So quite simply, there are many more students with disabilities than those registered with a disability services office. Given these limitations, many institutions will try to gather their own data about disability, often using a survey. While this seems simple, there are many ways to ask about disability, each of which has its pros and cons, and each of which is grounded in different theories and assumptions about disability, and which lead to different conclusions. Many folks default to something simple, like the NESI survey of college students, which asks, have you been diagnosed with any disability or impairment? Then if and only if students respond with a yes to that question, they're asked to check a box of one of 5 choices for a specific type of disability. This approach to measuring disability won't catch anyone who hasn't been formally diagnosed or who doesn't consider their disability to be an impairment. This simple approach also does not capture the many ways that students may identify as being disabled, given only 5 discrete choices. Another option is to ask yes or no questions for various disability types and skip the main gatekeeping question of whether or not someone has a disability. This is known as the medical model of disability and is the approach of surveys like UCLA's College Freshman Survey. An alternative to these approaches is something called a functional self-assessment, such as that used by the National Science Foundation in their survey of earned doctorates. They provide a set of scaled response options to the main question of what is the usual degree of difficulty you have with seeing, hearing, walking, lifting, and concentrating, remembering, or making decisions. This technique is much more nuanced and starts to get at the non-binary nature of whether or not someone, quote-unquote, has a disability. However, someone analyzing these data must then make a choice about where to draw the line. Should someone with a slight degree of difficulty be categorized as disabled? What about a moderate level? And who should really be making these decisions in the first place? To provide some context on how these choices can change conclusions about the prevalence of students with disabilities, I'll provide one final example. The Center for Student Success Research created a survey instrument that measures disability in multiple ways, which is revealing about the pros and cons of different approaches. We asked college students 3 questions. First, we asked, Do you think of yourself as a person with a disability in order to get at someone's identity rather than just a diagnosis? 7% of students selected the yes option to this question. Additionally, an unsure option was presented, and 9% of students selected this option, which emphasizes part of the reason why measuring disability is so difficult. We then asked a question about impairments or medical conditions and provided a list of 11 categories, plus an option for students to write in their own description. This did not require a positive response to any prior question about whether they did or did not have a disability. 42% of students checked at least one impairment or condition when asked this type of question. We also presented students with a functional assessment. With this type of measurement, over half of students indicated moderate or severe difficulty in at least one category. And then from all these individual measures, we created the most inclusive definition possible, including anyone who marked yes to the identity question, marked any impairment or medical condition, or who marked even slight difficulty on the functional assessment. 80% of college students were in this broadest category, identified as students who might experience a disabling environment at some point in their campus career. As is pretty obvious from these examples, measurement is tricky and disability is complicated. Simple binary measures are not adequate, and every measure has its pros and cons. So what should a campus do to measure disability and estimate its population of students with disabilities? The best approach is to have multiple approaches. Ask about disability in multiple ways, and use those rich data to provide a nuanced portrait of students with disabilities. Why not report the percentage of students registered with disability services, as well as the percent who identify as having a disability, and also a range of proportions of students in key categories, such as students reporting mental health conditions. This obviously complicates the simple answer that people want when they ask, how many students with disabilities are on this campus? Or when a faculty member wants to know, how many students in a lecture may have disabilities? But again, this is complicated, and multiple approaches are the thing that's needed. There's still a need to tailor services for students of different needs related to disability, particularly for students registered with disability services. At the same time, however, the real goal is transformational change of the systems and processes that students encounter, so they don't need to rely on individual formal accommodations to the extent that they currently do. For that to occur, universal design is the desired goal. This is true in the classroom, but also more broadly. If institutions can universally design systems, processes, and policies so that students with disabilities are served well through the typical processes, then exactly who does and does not have a disability at any given point in time is less relevant in terms of the likelihood of college student success. This brief video has given a glimpse at the issue of measuring disability and estimating the proportion of students with disabilities on a college campus. Please check out our other videos in this series, and feel free to contact us at the Center for Student Success Research, or to look us up at studentsuccessresearch.org. Thanks a lot.